respected colleagues, vice-chancellors, honoured members of the University of Porto, it's my enormous pleasure to be here today to address this gathering. Pedagogical innovation is something that I've been interested in since I first stepped into the teaching classroom as a beginning lecturer in Australia in 1991. My background is computer science, in particular parallel computer architecture and software engineering. So for me, this is a unique opportunity actually. It's probably the first time in my academic career where my two areas of expertise, education and computer science, actually mean that I have something to say that other people are interested in hearing. So I hope that what I have to say today won't bore you completely. But feel free to engage in spirited discussion afterwards, because that's the purpose of being provocative and standing up the front here and giving a talk such as this. So before we get onto that, perhaps I should tell you a little bit about myself. Unfortunately, that's already been largely hijacked by the wonderful introduction I just received. But I began my career in Australia. As you can tell from my accent, I grew up in Australia. And perhaps I should also apologise, my Portuguese is non-existent, so I'm afraid we have to make do in English today, and for that I apologise. I actually love foreign languages, so I'm fluent in Swedish, I speak reasonable broken French and broken German. And of course my favourite language is English, because that's the one that I grew up with and feel most comfortable with. But with that said, my Portuguese, total rubbish, so we're much better off with English today. So this is my background, and because of the unique combination of experience that I have, this role of giving advice in how people should deal with AI and education has become an increasing part of my life the last few years, and I'll try to provide you with some of my reflections. I started talking about this topic pretty much directly after the release of ChatGPT in 2022. And so I've been thinking about this for the last 4 or more years, but I was thinking about very similar things even before, because the challenges that we face in education are not really changed, I'm going to claim, by the introduction of AI. So how did we get here? Why AI now? Why not AI in 1991, when I was a student and newly graduated and had just taken courses in AI, in machine learning, in expert systems as part of my degree? Most of the models that we're using to do AI today are in fact models that existed even in the early 90s. So the models are not particularly new. What is new is these three things. We have access to computing power that is far beyond what we could imagine in the 1990s, when I used to go to a computing centre and the computer was locked away in a huge air-conditioned room and had about the same computing power as my mobile phone. So now we have cloud computing, we have huge data centres, we have the ability to connect all of these computing resources across the globe. With the other magical thing that we did back in the early 1990s, we invented the internet. And by connecting computers and other digital devices together, we have built an ecosystem of digital data that provides us with the third thing that we need to power AI: wide-scale access to digital human content. So what we did, and we have invested enormous amounts of national capital in this in many cultures, we've digitised our history, we've digitised our art, we've digitised our music, and we've made it available online. And unethical companies like OpenAI have sucked it all up, scraped it all off the internet, fed it into their models and built tools which essentially, as Chomsky has said, are the most advanced plagiarism generators on the planet, because all they do is cut and paste between what already exists. So if you think about this as being text prediction on your mobile phone on steroids, then you have a pretty appropriate mental model of this. It's really just small-scale cut and paste from such enormous volumes of data that what comes out the other end is indistinguishable in some sense from that we potentially might cut and paste together ourselves. But it has limitations. And I point out here, I'm trying to illustrate bias throughout the talk. All of the images nearly are prompted from a particular service, pixlr.com, and with the intention of trying to show how our bias in art, amongst other things, manifests itself in images that you try to generate to represent ideas. So just have a think about that in the background. This image, for instance, is the future of education in an off-planet environment where aliens and humans combine to learn. That was the prompt. Looks pretty much like a traditional classroom, doesn't it? A bit smoky. I thought we'd given up smoking in classrooms, but apparently not in the future. Perhaps smoking comes back. So there are many things in this image that you could ask yourself, why is this a representation of the future? Well, it's not a representation of the future because AI cannot generate for us a representation of the future. All it can do is cut and paste together from the past. And so anything that you try to ask it to do that predicts the future, represents the future, or encapsulates aspects of the future in any type of digital production is really just a cut and paste of the past. AI takes many forms, and this is a chart that I've drawn also off the internet. You don't need to read the details, but it connects the exponential growth of computing power and transistor density to the growth of AI models and tools and their release over time. And we can see that this is an exponential growth in services, and there are two types of service that we should be concerned about. In the green ring here, we have the invisible services, the ones that control your life, that are prompting your social media feed, that are conditioning what you see on news sites, that are gathering information about you every time you click on a computer screen or interact with your mobile phone, that are building up complex, invisible to you, profiles of who you are, with whom you interact, how you behave, how you interact with all forms of data, what you're interested in, what you like, do not like, what you buy, do not buy, what is your price sensitivity point in terms of buying an airline ticket to Australia so that I can, adjust the price up or down because I know where your pain point is so I can get the most money out of you, etc., etc., etc. And all of these services are built into everyday products that we're using without reflection, and which our children are using without reflection and our students are using without reflection. So those tools perhaps are the ones that change political opinions, that influence populations, that are used in all sorts of contexts where we probably should be more aware of them, and we don't talk about that nearly enough. These are the ones that everybody's getting upset about in the press, the ones that cut and paste and create things. And we're going to come back to the idea of creating. So these are the things that generate an output based on existing data. And again, as I said at the start, these AI systems are all based on huge probabilistic models. They take enormous volumes of data, they break it down into small components, and they compute relationships between these tiny components. Every prompt, every question that you enter into such a system then navigates these enormously complex networks and retrieves components and puts them together in plausible ways. Right? There's a lot of discussion in the popular press about AI and AI hallucination. It's one of the big areas of AI performance that causes a lot of people concern. I think hallucination was a very interesting term to pick there because AI systems actually do not hallucinate. Hallucination involves you actually divorcing yourself from an understanding of reality. AI never had an understanding of reality. It only had a probabilistic model of the data it was fed. So the thing about AI is that it's not hallucinating, it's performing as designed. But there was not sufficient data in the database behind it in order for it to generate something significantly plausible to you to an extent that the plausibility of that would convince you that this had a relationship to your reality. So here we are at a dilemma, right? Because AI systems, generative AI systems, are designed to make things up. And they're designed to make things up in very plausible ways. So they're not an information source. They're not a fact base. They are not an internet query or a Google search. They are a construction of new combinations of existing data to please you, based on what the profiling that lies behind the system thinks will be most persuasive and which you'll be most receptive to. So continued interaction with AI systems conditions the system to try, because this is the economic model of them, right? Engagement is the economic model. They want you to engage more and more and more. And so therefore the outputs are also conditioned to draw you into the system and to cause you to engage more and more and more. All right, let's combine this with another observation. So I began my teaching career in Europe at Uppsala University, in Uppsala, Sweden. What is Uppsala University proud of? Uppsala University is proud of the fact that it was founded in 1477. And the first students arrived to listen to professors give public lectures in 1478. Why did a person come to Uppsala in 1478 to listen to professors standing in the city squares giving public lectures? Because the university curated knowledge. The university had collected the brightest minds in that region of the world. The university had a library. It had books. It had content that could be distilled by these very bright minds and related to others. You went to Uppsala because the only way to gain access to that knowledge and that insight was to go there, listen and write it down. And then you took it home with you. And you also had a copy of that knowledge. But now we have people like Physics, who's a Twitch streamer. He's a former chef who's become apparently a quantum information theorist. He's also a husband, a father, a vocalist in a rock band, but only sometimes. And he streams on relativistic quantum information theory regularly. Fortunately, to not too many people, right? Because we can ask ourselves, what does this guy actually really know? And what credentials does he have to tell other innocent minds things that potentially he's just making up? So we are not in control of the information streams. Our students are looking at that. They are also perhaps accessing these sort of things. I can tell you that this is very common. When I had students come into my office, it'd be 5 or 6 years ago now, I was teaching a course in computer networking at the basic bachelor's level. These students came into my office hours. So, Dr. Pears, can you help us with this assignment? I said, oh, sure, no worries. What's the problem with the assignment? I said, oh, well, we have this assignment and we got stuck here and here. I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's not my assignment. Oh, no. We're taking an online course in computer networking parallel with yours at MIT, and we'd like some help with their assignment. I said, okay, fair enough. I can help you with their assignment too. It actually wasn't a bad assignment, by the way. It was MIT. And so, no, but seriously, these students were actually doing something good. They were broadening their experience, they were seeing multiple perspectives, they came to me for help, so they didn't feel threatened. They could come to me with an assignment from another course, knowing that they could get help, because what I was interested in was them learning something, not that it came from me. And I think that's something that we have to be aware of now with AI also, that we have to allow ourselves to let go. We're no longer really in control. We can't control all the things that the students see, use, touch, feel, and how they put together their lives is very different from the way that we put ours together. And of course, many of our students actually would rather watch a YouTube video than go to our lectures. And quite often those YouTube videos are much flashier They're better cut, they're better filmed, they're more pedagogically put together than my own material. And so I can't grudge them that. My own kids don't want me to explain how to do mathematical derivations. They'd much rather watch somebody on YouTube because it's non-threatening, right? If Dad explains it to you, then you feel like an idiot. I still remember to this very day the feeling of dread in my stomach when I had to sit down at the kitchen table with my mother, who's an English teacher, and she would go through with a red pen and correct the extra essays that I had to write at home for her so that I would get a better grade at school, right? I still can't sit at that kitchen table. She still has the same kitchen table. Without having this involuntary reaction of, oh my goodness, she's going to mark my essay. But no, she doesn't do that anymore, luckily. So there was a threat image, and there's so much material out here, right? You can watch an infinite number of videos on how to use ChatGPT to do, in principle, pretty much anything. So we're not in control. If we're not in control, then what can we do? Okay, so let's talk about education and generative AI and AI in general. And let's remember also that all AI is not equal, right? So what we're afraid of, what we're talking about a lot is generative AI, these probabilistic statistical models that put together output based on an input. But there's a lot of other AI that does pattern matching, that does image analysis, and so on and so forth. And many of those AI applications are generating significant performance improvements in fields like medicine and biology and in other areas. So let's not underestimate the good that AI can do. So I think there's a dialogue in the popular imagination and also in higher education, that generative AI is a fundamental disruptor of education. And we can have a think about that. One of the things that we have lots of is this. We have lots of buildings. Why do we have buildings? I'm going to think about that. We're sitting in a nicely renovated one right now, which cost a lot of money. So why do we build these things? What are they for? Why do we configure them the way we do? Why is the furniture set up the way it is? It says a lot about our expectations of education and our expectations in relation to what spaces will be used for. But I'm going to argue that one of the fundamental things about education is that it's a human activity. It's a social activity. And learning is about us interacting with and learning from each other. And so when AI comes into the picture, then suddenly we have an extra component that we need to bring into that environment. I don't think we can exclude it. I think it's too late for that. I don't think that forbidding anything has ever worked. We just have to look at the history of prohibition in the United States to see how well that worked with alcohol. I don't think it works well with AI either. But we can ask ourselves some serious questions. What does this change? Does it change the way that we do teaching? Is it going to change the essence of instructional design? I'm going to argue that it does. I'm also going to argue that we need new examination and grading practices. And I'm going to explain why in a minute. This is a familiar scene. Many of us remember this moment. Oh my God, I hadn't prepared for that question. On the other hand, this is one of the truly genuine moments where you challenge your intellect against somebody else's. Somebody has written the question, you should write the answer. There's nobody there but you, the piece of paper, and your cognition to help you. And that's something also that we need to think about. When do we want to cognitively offload ourselves and give part of our thinking process to a tool? Because that's what AI does. So as we move online, this is going to change work in all professions. And I'm going to show you some statistics from McKinsey, a study that they did in the US, and predictions that are being used by US companies. And I think that that underlines the fact that things are changing. So I think the answer to these questions is yes. And our role as educators is to work out what to do about it. And it requires us to be, I suspect, significantly more agile than we have been in the past. So I'm going to argue that generative AI transforms the nature of cognitive performance. We have learners, yes, and those we've been very centred on all the time. We have technologies. AI is just another technology, actually. And if you think of technology generally in education, every time we introduce a technology, we change something in the classroom practice. We introduced slide rules and got rid of mathematical tables. That changed some aspects of our intuition about logarithms and trigonometric functions. We introduced graphing calculators and so forth. I'm going to come back to that. So technology is all around us, and this is just another, albeit more advanced, technology. The important thing to consider here is the pedagogy, because the combination of all of these things is going to be the education of the future. And the question for us is, what do we want that future to look like? So, a lot of the European curriculum has been focused around competencies. What is a competency? One definition is that competency is built up of skills, what you can do, what can be done, what is the handcraft of this. Knowledge, what can be known, what can be understood, what can be embodied in us as knowledge. Reification is a nice English word for that. And dispositions, the wisdom, foresight and ethical compass with which to apply the first two in any specific context to the benefit of ourselves, our societies and humanity as a whole. We probably don't spend enough time in university education on the last of these, but nonetheless it is there, and it is there all the time, and we do talk about these things with our students. Tools, especially generative AI, have a tendency to change the world for us. What happens as we integrate our knowledge with a knowledge base that can respond to queries in very sophisticated ways that look like conversation? Am I talking to another person, or am I talking to the history of the human race? Which part of the history of the human race am I talking to? I'm talking to the middle class, English-speaking male part of the human race, primarily, when I talk to AI tools, because that's the data that they're trained on. And our historical data is enormously biased, and the tools have been trained primarily on data that is drawn from the English-speaking corpus. This is not true of image processing tools and music tools, but it is true of all of the text tools. There are very few generative AI tools that have been trained on Swedish literature. There are relatively few, I suspect, that have been trained on the full historical corpus of Portuguese written works. So when we interact with these tools, we're interacting with something that actually grew out of another culture than our own, and we need to be also very aware of that. So tools amplify skill in very, very simple ways and in very, very complex ways. And AI as a tool has the opportunity to amplify skill in specific ways and disempower skill in other ways. In the same way that if I have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. If I have many tools, then I can differentiate between nails and screws and bolts and all sorts of other things that I can manipulate with those tools. And this is an extremely sophisticated and advanced tool, and so we're capable of attacking very many problem domains with it. It also helps us actually to expand our knowledge if used in the right way. Anybody who thinks that talking with AI agents is a complete waste of time is probably kidding themselves, because the access and synthesis and sophistication of these tools is very considerable now, and they are evolving by the day. And we need to ask ourselves the question, how does this then potentially democratise access to sufficiently good dialogue around knowledge topics that it is more benefit than it is harm? I stood in the public display room of the British Science Museum for an afternoon in their interactive display section and watched kids and parents come in and interact with displays that that attempt to help people to understand principles in physics, thermodynamics, forces and so forth. It's fascinating. You should do it sometime. The amount of stuff that parents make up to try to explain to their kids how things work is incredible. It's not just AI that's making stuff up. We all are making stuff up all the time, actually, when we don't really understand. We sort of try to interpolate. So AI only has to be better than we are on average, or the uneducated parent is on average, to actually potentially be an advantage for that disadvantaged kid in the small village who only has access to AI on the mobile phone. And it can mediate our dispositions. This is the dangerous bit. This is where social media manipulation and Cambridge Analytics and the whole Brexit phenomenon come into play. Interaction with AI involves a conversation with a biased representation of the world. This will influence your thinking over time. And we need to understand in what ways does that mediation happen and how do we deal with it in educational settings. So this is the most important bit. Generative AI breaks the link between process and product. We have been so used to trying to assess process by looking at product that we've forgotten that the interesting part of the learning actually happened in the process. There's no learning in the outcome. The outcome is the result of a process. And we have given students assignments, we've put students in laboratories, we have talked and had discussion seminars and so forth for a reason, so that people will engage in cognitive processes, in information retrieval, in repetition, in ways that we know strengthen our mental capabilities to do things. And it's those mental capabilities that are important in education. If we can use generative AI to help us to reflect more powerfully, can help us to gain different types of insights more quickly, then it's probably a net win. On the other hand, if we continue to focus on grading products instead of grading process in our environments, we're going to undermine our entire educational system. So I'm going to claim that assessing product has always been a bad idea. We have just thought that it was very convenient because we can do it at scale with 400 people, and we kid ourselves that the time that we spent on doing that was time well spent. So let's stop doing this. Let's get into the classroom with our younger colleagues and do the things that we really care about, interacting, being human, and actually learning from each other. Their AI doesn't have a place. It cannot replace the effect of having a social context. We know that university dropout is very, very highly predicted by your feeling of inclusion and your social integration into your class cohort at the university. So the social component of learning should not be underestimated. This is why MOOC failed. MOOC doesn't work because you have no relationship to the material that's in the platform, and you have no social interaction. So dropout rates in MOOC are enormous, and that should be no surprise to us. Learning is an intensely human activity, and we need to be very, very careful about the parts of it we delegate away. And we can help all of our students, our graduate students, our colleagues to handle AI by realising that this assessment, this enormous focus on the quality of the artefact is actually completely misleading. We don't actually care so much about that. Well, we do later. In a workplace, as an engineer, if you build a bridge and it falls down, you're going to get fired. So, you should build bridges that don't fall down or aeroplanes that don't fall out of the sky. There is product is important. But in learning, product is much, much less important than process. So we need to work out how to assess process at scale, and maybe actually classification systems and AI can help us, right? AI will give you the opportunity to look at student learning behaviours in much more sophisticated ways, to pick out the stuff that really matters. Plus, I think that we should spend just more of our time in the classroom interacting with people and less time sitting in our offices marking exams. I don't find that very fun. Maybe you do, but I don't. But the fundamental point here is what is the handover point? when do I give control of what I want to achieve to the AI? Not an easy question. I'll come back to that. So artefacts are a convenient proxy, especially in very large classes, but it's also extremely time-consuming to assess those classes anyway, and maybe that time could be spent on something more productive. It's going to be my claim. I can give you a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation. In Uppsala, I had 6-hour exams for 200 students. Students can write a lot of text in 6 hours in inconceivably bad handwriting, right? Which it is enormously difficult to read. And so these students, the Swedish law says that the students should receive the results of their assessment within 15 working days of the assessment being completed. So 3 working weeks. And so students would start to mail me after about 2 weeks. So when are the exam results going to be released? So this is 200 student class. Okay, so I have 200 times 6 hours of text. How many pages do you think that is? So it's a couple of thousand pages. Okay, yeah. So, and how much time, let's suppose I have 200 exams. How much time should I spend on grading each exam? You spent 6 hours writing. How much time should I spend reading it? 15 minutes? Half an hour? An hour? And then you do the maths, right? 200 hours of work if I'm going to spend an hour marking each exam. 200 hours. Could I spend 200 hours of my time more productively than sitting in a dark room at home wondering what on earth the student wrote? I took away all my exams and I gave the students written exercises and I told them, you will come into my office for 20 minutes and I'm going to pick 2 of these at random and we're going to talk about them. Much better result. And I had much more fun. Anyway, let's move on. So generative AI, just in case we were wondering what it is, I think we can summarise it very quickly in this way. Identifies relevant data patterns in large data sets in relation to an instruction, and then it uses these permutations of this internal data set to construct simulated new content. And the outputs are always based on patterns in the data and they reproduce them. And we have to remember that this is normative, right? So what is most common in the data set is also what is most common in the output. And so it converges. And the more things we generate with AI, the more normative the training data patterns become. We reproduce. We're peeing into the pool, right? And so what happens is that the data pool is now corrupted. It's hard to distinguish. In fact, we can't distinguish AI-generated content from human-generated content in many contexts. So now we're training tools on data that potentially could be predominantly AI-generated. What does this mean, right? It's no longer generating data based on what we historically have done. It's generating new data based on its already pre-existing generated data. And this causes interesting trends in AI tools. If you go to some image generation tools, you'll see that the palette of colours that is used to produce images is very limited. And they come out looking very stereotyped. Why is that? Well, there's been an interesting trend in some of these tools because a lot of people were asking the image generation tools to produce Ghibli-like images, you know, the famous cartoonist in Japan. Over time, the system converges on that colour palette and everything you get is dominated by that thinking. And so when we try to generate something, irrespective nearly of how you generate the prompt, you get reproductions of what already exists, and this is marginalising human content every day. Every time we generate something, we're reducing our own original input. Okay, so the results are biased in many, many ways, and to just illustrate this, I tried to produce more visualisations of the idea that AI breaks the connection between process and product. It doesn't matter how sophisticated I make my prompt, I always get basically the same visualisation. Right? Again, very limited set of metaphors. And actually, because AI is not connected to the reality of anything, it doesn't understand metaphor. So there are a lot of limitations in these tools that we need also to be aware of. Let's just have a look at bias. If you ask an AI image tool to generate nurses in front of a hospital, oh, funnily enough, they were women. Doctors, men, right? Very simple to see. Is this the sort of thing that you want your kids doing? Giving them the impression that all doctors or the majority of doctors are male and that maybe this is not a career for me? Can be quite insidious. All right, so I'm going to claim that even though we're afraid of it, generative AI is actually not something we should be afraid of because it doesn't generate new or innovative solutions. It can't be used to identify innovative or original thinking because it's normative, right? The truly original, the truly innovative is on the outside edge of the bell curve. It's the things that we cannot decide whether or not they're good or bad, brilliant or insane. But they're interesting because they're not normative. AI can't write insightful text for you. It can't write about you because it knows nothing about you. If you try to get AI to write texts about you, it will ask you lots of questions about yourself first, and then it will use that to write a text later. All right, so what does the future hold? Because I need to wrap this up. So McKinsey's done an analysis of how they think AI is going to change industries in the US, and they predict this. This is industry advanced through through process automation of AI in the period between when that was published a year or so back and 2030. So they predict that 30% of the hours worked today will be automated by AI by 2030. And it varies by disciplinary area. They could be wrong, but industries don't think they're wrong. Industries are picking up AI like wildfire and deploying it in all sorts of processes. And they're going to expect our students to be able to do that from day one. So we can't ignore it either. These skill areas, we need to understand right now, probably yesterday, what it is that industry is doing with AI in each of these sectors. And then we need to change our courses and our degree programs to prepare graduates to work with those tools in those ways in those sectors. But it's good news for us because it's not going to lead to unemployment. It's going to lead to enormous growth in the need for highly skilled professionals. Sure, some things like help desk will go away. This is really bad news for all of the people in Pakistan and India who are manning help desks with a manual. And so, have you turned on your router? Step one. Have you seen that the cables are connected to your router? Step two, right? And it doesn't matter what you know or how you try to sort of shift them into another dialogue about what your actual problem is. They have the script and they are going to go through the script, and AI will do it too and does it better. So some of those things are going to go away. Let's talk briefly before I wrap up about tools and cognitive offloading. I'm going to claim that AI is just one in a long series of tools and that we don't actually need to be afraid because the tools have been changing thinking all the way along. Slide rules changed the way, as I said earlier, that we thought about logarithms, trigonometric functions. We were really scared of graphing calculators. Students won't know how to calculate inflection points and points of intersection because the tool does it for them. But mathematics has survived that. Mathematics instruction is still here. We've learned to cope with the tool. Microsoft Word, the little bouncing paperclip telling me what to do, annoyed me enormously, but it's also very helpful when you're learning a foreign language because it tells you when your grammar's wrong and when your spelling is incorrect, and you can go and look things up and you can learn stuff. The key with tools is in the use pattern, right? I could just accept all of the suggestions from Microsoft Word and learn nothing. Or I could go away and look up the words and wonder why my grammar was wrong and go and read a Swedish grammar and learn what mistakes I was making and improve myself. Exactly the same tool, exactly the same functionality, two different mindsets in relation to it, two completely different learning outcomes. And this will happen with mood analysis in messaging, in the ability to generate images. Grammarly, is Grammarly allowed, not allowed? What does Grammarly do to your language skills? Unknown. I think my PhD students who use Grammarly write worse now than they did before they started. That's my personal observation. And now, of course, we have generative AI, and we can generate text. And the question is, when do we not care about the text sufficiently that we would ask AI to do it for us? And then we can talk about, very, very briefly, research, because this is not just limited to undergraduate education. This is infiltrating even our own academic discipline, right? Maybe AI is our research buddy. There are all sorts of tools there. Let's supercharge our next research paper by having AI tools piff up the language and make sure that it's more likely to get published in the latest journals. I can adjust your language so that it'll be favoured by reviewers in America. Brilliant. But is it my text anymore? You've got better time. You've better things to do with your time than to write that grant application. AI can write your dissemination package, your management package, and all of the other standard aspects of your application better than you can. And your colleague down the corridor is already using this tool, and you might miss out on the next grant because they were using the tool and you weren't. Can you afford to be left behind? This is the rhetoric that's out there right now. And then we're building this into tools. AI, there's an AI add-on in everything, right? I updated Keynote on my tablet. It's now got 6 AI buttons at the top of the screen to generate new slides and... Really? I don't want to think for myself anymore? What is the message here? But I think this is more dangerous when you build in AI into SPSS, for instance. I can clean your data for you. I can tell you what parametric test to run. I know whether you want to do a paired t-test or whether or not you want to do... Really? And then would I learn anything about statistical methods if I'm using these hints? This one really, really bothers me because I do a lot of qualitative analysis. If I feed my transcripts into NVivo and then I ask it to do the content analysis for me, where is my contribution as a researcher? Where is my contextualisation? I don't even know what these people necessarily have said. How can I possibly trust the result? How can I possibly publish the result and believe that I'm being an ethical researcher? And yet, the temptation is there. And we're now using AI to design drugs and to design surface coatings, to explore permutations of different chemical formulae and so on and so forth. You know, AlphaFold, for instance, being one of the tools that has made the news recently. Okay, learning nonetheless, I'm going to claim, and this is why we don't really need to be concerned. Learning is about human growth. We should be having very serious conversations with our students about human growth and what it means to grow as a person and why they want to do it with us, not delegate away that to AI. Bits of it we probably do want to delegate to AI because we are under pressure. We're under financial pressure, we're under time pressure. The temptation is there to optimise my life. And every time I feel that temptation, I ask myself a very fundamental question. Is this something in my academic process, in my academic life, that I care so little about that I can give it away to a completely automated process? Because that's what it means. That's what it has to be. It has to be something that actually I don't care about at all, because then I can delegate it away. If it was something I cared about, then I'm doing it for another reason, either for my own personal growth or for somebody else's growth. And perhaps the future imitates the past. As I said, this is a classroom in a compulsory school in Dalarna, north of Uppsala, where I live, in 1880. And if you ask AI to tell you what the future of education holds, It looks like this, or this, or this. AI reproduces the past. It can't tell us the future. We develop the future. This is a difficult slide. I'm going to give you all the presentation and it's been recorded, but this is the fundamental message. We are in the business that we're in because we're interested in cognitive development. This particular chart is an amalgamation of research by Swedish and Scottish researchers. It was first published in a paper in a somewhat different form of Noel Entwistle about a decade ago. It divides the learning process and the process of cognitive development into two dimensions: conceptions of what knowledge is and conceptions of what strategies can be used to acquire knowledge. And they're related to each other. If we think that knowledge is about facts given to us by authorities, then our strategy is piecemeal memorisation of fact. The more we understand that knowledge is conditional upon context and many other factors, the more we move towards the right of the diagram. And that's where we would want our advanced university students to be, understanding that knowledge is about making reasoned choices between alternatives, understanding the role of evidence in high-level intellectual reasoning. All of these outcomes can both be strengthened and undermined by AI, and we need to understand how. Okay, so all is not lost, but it is crucial to distinguish between personal development, what helps me as an individual to become richer, more cognitively resilient, to expand my own capabilities. That's what teaching and education and learning is about. And then the use of AI in professional performance as a performance accelerator, where I in the workplace will be twice as productive with AI as I was without it. We can also think that when we judge now, what we should be judging is not purely the outcome of the performance, but the whole. What is the integrated capability of an individual and their AI companion? Is that what we should assess? How can we as augmented individuals perform? And what does that mean? And how would we assess it? So I'm going to finish off with this. Generative AI doesn't change the learning process. Our intellectual and cognitive development processes are largely governed by factors that are not going to be changed by a single external tool. But it does potentially change our motivation to learn. Plagiarism has always been in the academic environment, and I have the rather controversial belief that plagiarism is nearly always our fault. We failed to make the exercise that we were asking sufficiently relevant that the student thought it was worthwhile, right? And if you don't think something's worthwhile, the temptation to shortcut the process to get to the product is overwhelming, right? So what we need to do is we need to embed AI in authentic environments where people can understand what it gives them and what it takes away. So learning requires engagement, persistence and effort. AI can undermine that. It can undermine our self-will. It can undermine our motivation. But learning is an inherently social activity, and the human presence, the nature of the investments that we have in buildings, in laboratories, in practical work, I think these need to grow rather than diminish. And learning involves valuing the process itself, not the outcome. It's never been about the outcome. And learning in any form, research or undergraduate, is not about optimisation. It's about understanding and having rich experiences. And sometimes the richest experiences are the ones that were not successful, where we learned what not to do, or we learned a lot by failing first and then succeeding. And we need to focus perhaps our students more on that. So it's not the time for panic, but we do need to be more agile. We need to teach AI in relevant ways in our professional areas. And we need to focus on what AI to teach rather than trying to forbid it, right? As soon as you make it part of the content, then it's obvious, right? Every student knows what they're supposed to do. Until you make it part of the content, it's always this nebulous, am I allowed to or not allowed to? What will my professor say if I do X? If the professor is there saying, now we're going to use AI to do X, the problem goes away, right? So have a think about that. That's my take on it, at least. If you're a student and you're sitting in the audience today, I have one message for you. Think about your own learning and think about, in relation to the learning goal that I have in this particular course, how can I use AI to undermine my personal development and to fail to achieve the learning outcome? How can I use it to maximise my learning, my personal growth, and achieve the outcome even better than I could before? So with that said, thank you very much.